On May 18, 1979, Arturo Daniel Aranda was found guilty of murdering a police officer. However, several decades later, all is not as it seems, as Aranda is still on death row awaiting execution. Here are the tales of 8 cartel members and what happens to them on death row.
A severed head led Arlington police to the bodies of 2 people who were apparently executed.
November 2019, Acosta was sentenced to death for the gruesome murder of his roommate. But the crime would be the tip of the iceberg as more disturbing activities came to light. Hector Acosta-Ojeda is a hitman for the Cartel del Noreste, who was feared for the gruesome ways he killed people. Acosta, going by the nickname El Cholo, was born in Monterrey, Mexico. He would show a fascination with gang culture at a very young age. And later he would join various gangs in both Mexico and Houston, eventually becoming a member of the Cartel del Noreste. Acosta admitted to participating in numerous criminal activities, including kidnappings, torture, and murder. In fact, while he was awaiting trial at Tarrant County Jail, he tried to start a drug trafficking operation, according to evidence presented in court.
Hector Acosta-Ojeda. They say that he's connected to the human remains we've reported about.
September 2017. Acosta was arrested for shooting his roommate Zelaya and his girlfriend Chirinos while they slept. He wouldn't stop there, though. He also disfigured their bodies with a machete and wooden board before proceeding to cut off Zelaya's head and left it on a walking trail with a threatening message. Acosta claimed he did this in revenge for a past drive-by shooting he thought Zelaya was involved in. Months earlier in that same year, Acosta and his accomplices were also responsible for the brutal robbery and beating of Tristan Algene in Fort Worth, Texas. November 2019, jurors deliberated for just over 4 hours after the trial and sentenced Acosta to the death penalty. While on death row, his prison life is marked by isolation and scrutiny. Aside from few interactions he may have with fellow cartel members who are also incarcerated, he's kept in solitary confinement, away from the general prison population, to prevent any potential harm to himself or others. This guy has enemies all over the place, so prison officials take extra precautions to keep Acosta safe. The better part of his days are spent in a small cell, with limited privileges and constant surveillance. In fact, prison officials and of course some other inmates would single him out for the heinous crimes he had committed, and he's constantly reminded of the lives he took and the drugs he smuggled. Acosta is sometimes denied privileges granted to other prisoners, such as recreational time or access to the prison's library. His meals are served to him through that cell door slot, and his major human interaction is with lawyers and prison officials. Now, talking about his cell, it's sparsely furnished, with only a bed, toilet, and a sink. As he awaits his execution, they allow him limited personal items, such as a few books or photographs. With only the basic of amenities, Acosta is reminded every day of the great price he must pay for his crimes.
Before that, he was indicted for being the leader of a drug ring that imported tons of marijuana from Mexico into the U.S. And he was also linked to 5 other murders, 4 of them in Mexico.
November 1992, Juan Garza was arrested for the murder of at least 8 people. Unknown to him, this arrest would become the turning point that put everything on the line, including his life. Juan Raul Garza was an American killer and drug lord who had links to the Medellin cartel. His drug trafficking ring would get exposed around 1990 after police seized his shipments. He suspected some of his workers had started working with authorities. This led to a series of murders, and Garza sought to eliminate anyone he perceived as a threat. That same year, Gilberto Matos, a bodyguard of one of Garza's associates, became the first victim. Garza had ordered that hit because he thought the associate was responsible for his seized shipment. 5 months later, Garza put a hit on his associate Erasmo de la Fuente. De la Fuente was shot twice as he left the nightclub. Garza paid 2 of his men known as the Flores brothers who carried out the hit $10,000 each. In January 1991, he personally executed Thomas Rumbo, one of his associates who had been caught loading marijuana into a trailer. Rumbo had tried to cover his tracks, but Garza didn't believe him. In November 1992, authorities would close in on Garza after months of surveillance and intelligence gathering. He was arrested after making a drug deal with an undercover agent. He would then be indicted on multiple drug trafficking charges and 3 counts of murder. And as a result of the irrefutable evidence, prosecutors sought the death penalty, alleging Garza was responsible for at least 8 murders, including 4 in Mexico. By 1993, Garza was found guilty on all counts. The jury would also conclude he'd be responsible for the 4 unsolved murders in Mexico, and as a result, Juan Raul Garza was sentenced to death by lethal injection, becoming the first and currently the only drug lord to be executed by the U.S. federal government. So following the verdict, Garza's supporters claimed that his sentence was biased against him because of his race. However, Attorney General John Ashcroft noted that all 6 men charged with murder, including Garza, were Hispanic. The prosecutor, judge, victims, and all 6 jurors in Garza's trial were also Hispanic, showing that race was not a factor here. July 13, 1999, federal authorities transferred Garza from the Texas Department of Criminal Justice to federal custody. Garza was one of 3 condemned inmates moving from the Texas death row to the new federal death row wing in USP Terre Haute, Indiana on that day. He would try to appeal that sentence several times, but his fate was sealed. While on death row at the Federal Correctional Complex Terre Haute, Garza was in a very difficult situation. So in the harsh conditions of death row, he would turn to faith to keep him calm and focused. His quiet nature, however, didn't stop cruel guards from treating him badly. They would often say degrading things that would definitely dehumanize anyone who heard it, but Garza wanted to make most of his time and just find some peace. He wouldn't join in any violent behavior and just decided to spend most of his time alone. June 19, 2001 was the day Garza was executed. For his last meal, he requested steak, French fries, onion rings, Diet Cola, and 3 slices of bread. His last words were,
"I just want to say that I'm sorry, and I apologize for all the pain and grief that I have caused. I ask your forgiveness and God bless."
3 minutes after Garza was given the lethal injection, he was pronounced dead.
A Mexican national was sentenced to life in prison for his role in the Sinaloa cartel's narcotics distribution operations.
April 11, 2012. Arturo Urquidi was indicted in connection with his affiliation and dealings with the Sinaloa cartel. However, the details of his operation were beyond what anyone could have ever imagined. Arturo shows Urquidi, aka Chus, used to be a police officer in Chihuahua, but that was just a cover for his real job. Urquidi is a longtime member of the notorious Sinaloa cartel under Ismael Mayo Zambada Garcia, and as one of its key members, he was responsible for securing secret warehouses where massive amounts of cocaine was stored. These stash houses operated like hubs, where drugs were unloaded from trucks and replaced with weapons and cash bound for Culiacan in Sinaloa. With his position as a police officer, he had always some kind of inside information that helped him know his way around smuggling thousands of kilos of cocaine into the U.S. The estimated value of drugs he smuggled in is placed over at $1 billion. Between 2008 and 2012, the city of Juarez became one of the most dangerous places in the world after the cartel tried to take control of the city, leaving about 10,000 people dead. Chus was later identified as one of the members of Sinaloa, as he facilitated the killings by bending the law to his will in 2018. Shortly after that, he was extradited to the U.S. On October 22, 2021, Chus's luck ran out when the federal jury in El Paso found him guilty on multiple counts. The charges included conspiracy, drug trafficking, money laundering, and of course, firearm possession. For these, he was sentenced to a lifetime behind bars. Now, his time in prison has been pretty unpleasant. In prison, there's a power structure with those at the bottom suffering at the hands of dominant inmates. So even though Urquidi had some street cred from being a former drug lord with ties to the great Sinaloa cartel, in here, he was nobody. In fact, the constant threat of violence from rival cartel members would add an extra layer of fear and anxiety. Urquidi faced a dire situation in here, struggling to get access to basic necessities like food, water, and hygiene. You see, overcrowding is a major issue in this prison, resulting from people being in here for too long before their trial, and inadequate facilities. The unhygienic conditions and lack of nutrition drastically affected his physical and mental health, causing him to slowly dwindle away. And in a place like this, you'd expect the privacy is also very scarce, with shared cells and constant surveillance, making it difficult for any prisoner to find some kind of solace or peace. This guy didn't have much in here and he was always looking over his shoulder. Plus, if you break the rules in here, you're sent to solitary, which further increases his struggle, leaving him feeling anxious, isolated, and alone. May 2023. Hossein Panjak's family gathered around the prison where he was incarcerated in hopes of mercy. But Panjak's fate was sealed and his life was at stake.
سرکرده باند توزیع مواد مخدر کوکائین در پایتخت بودند.
May 2014, Hossein Panjak, a 32-year-old Iranian drug smuggler, was arrested at his house party that he threw to celebrate his newfound wealth. Alongside him, 5 others were also arrested, and a large amount of drugs including cocaine, opium, and methamphetamines were seized right at the scene. Panjak was known as the Sultan of Cocaine, who had a long history of criminal activities, having been arrested around 17 times. Despite this, he continued to lead 3 international drug trafficking groups for at least a decade, smuggling narcotics to several European countries, including the Netherlands. The authorities caught him at his party with 750 kilos of heroin. Now, Panjak and the other 5 members were arrested and sentenced to death by the Supreme Court, marking the end of his long and dangerous reign as a drug lord. But before his execution, he was incarcerated at the Gezel Hisar prison in Karaj, Iran. There, he constantly dealt with various authorities, who would often take him away for questioning, trying to scare him into confessing more of his crimes by threatening to hurt him or making his execution more painful. The authorities would take it a step further and also threaten to harm his family. Panjak was questioned all throughout the day, sometimes for as long as 5 or 6 hours. The prison guards refused to let him see a doctor, even when he was sick, and he was often denied visits from his family. They tried sticking words in his mouth and make him say things that he didn't really mean. The constant questioning and mistreatment took a toll on his mental health, and so he tried to fight back, but this only earned him some days in solitary before his execution. In May 2023, Hossein Panjak was hanged at Gezel Hisar prison, along with 5 other cartel members. His execution was carried out despite the pleas for clemency by family members who had gathered in front of the jail. May 18, 1979, Arturo Aranda was sentenced to death by lethal injection. However, 44 years down the line, he's still on death row awaiting execution. On July 31, 1976, around midnight, Candelario Vieira, an undercover Laredo police officer assigned to help a DEA task force, caught sight of 2 men, Arturo Daniel Aranda and his brother, Juan Jose Aranda, loading something into a 1959 Ford station wagon in a downtown parking lot on the banks of the Rio Grande. That something turned out to be 500 pounds of marijuana. As an experienced drug officer, Vieira knew the area and suspected the vehicle was going to go to a known drug smuggling spot. So Vieira quickly followed the wagon after it was done loading its package in an unmarked car. However, since there was little traffic, the brothers quickly knew that they were being followed. As Aranda was trying to throw him off their trail, Vieira requested backup. At this intersection, Officer Pablo Albedrez, who received the call for backup, stopped the station wagon and Vieira pulled up behind it. When the brothers realized they were cornered, they decided to go down fighting rather than surrendering. Without warning, a shootout started. Arturo was shot in the left shoulder and hand. However, Pablo Albedrez wasn't so lucky, as he was fatally shot in the chest, which led to internal bleeding. Laredo police and the Texas Department of Public Safety troopers arrived at the scene shortly after and took Arturo and Juan Jose into custody. Albedrez was rushed to the Mercy Hospital but was declared dead on arrival. On May 18, 1979, Arturo was identified in court as the one who fired that deadly shot. He, however, denies this, claiming that it was Vieira who shot Albedrez by accident. But the fact that he was on parole at the time of the incident didn't make things look good for him. Arturo was sentenced to death by lethal injection, and his brother Juan, who was on parole at the time, got a life sentence. Arturo was sent to Allen B. Polunsky Unit in West Livingston, Texas, while he awaited his execution. However, in 2023, which was 44 years and 3 months after that conviction, Arturo was still on death row. He wakes up alone in a small cell. He has no TV, and his typewriter, which is one of the few items he's allowed to have, was gradually breaking down. This guy's been without human connection for decades. His only interactions are with the guards who watch over him, providing the bare essentials for survival. According to him, he hasn't felt the warmth of a hug or the firmness of a handshake from a loved one since his sentencing in 1979. No family member has ever visited him, no friend has written to him, and no kind word has been spoken to him since. The terrible condition of his imprisonment has left him isolated in this small cell, with only his thoughts to keep him company. After many failed appeals, Arturo is now 75 years old and remains on death row. His last execution date was in 1988, and it has yet to be reset.
Los hermanos Luis, José y Simón González Villarreal fueron detenidos en la ciudad de Johor Bahru, en Malasia, apenas un mes después de su llegada.
2008, three brothers from Mexico, Luis Alfonso, Jose de Gino, and Simón González Villarreal, were arrested in Malaysia. Now, they were caught at a lab where police found a large amount of methamphetamine worth $15 million. Villarreal and his brothers are from Culiacan, Sinaloa, a region known for its drug trade. Before moving to Malaysia, they worked in a brickyard their whole lives. And when their family back in Mexico was contacted after they were arrested, an older brother, Israel Gonzalez Villarreal, said the family had no idea what they were getting into when they took a job offer abroad. Villarreal is believed to have worked for the Sinaloa Cartel, and the organization is connected with Asian suppliers. Although they weren't known criminals in Mexico, authorities say it's common for newbies to run meth labs since it's relatively a simple operation. So in 2011, during their trial, the brothers claimed innocence, stating that they had nothing to do with making illegal drugs. However, they were found guilty and sentenced to death by hanging. The brothers' lawyers tried to appeal the conviction, but it was denied. Now the Gonzalez Villarreal brothers await execution in Malaysia, a fate that has left their family and friends in shock. The brothers are currently trapped in a harsh prison environment, and the language barriers and isolation are just the beginning of their problems. In this unforgiving place, they're often ignored and neglected by the authorities and fellow inmates alike. They have no friends, allies, or protection, and are constant targets for bullying, abuse, and assault. Their nationality also makes them outcasts, causing them to be subjected to more cruelty and hostility. If the brothers were arrested back home, at least they would have some fellow cartel members to talk to. However, here in Malaysia, it's a far cry from what they would have expected. The cultural divide has them feeling lost and alone, unable to connect with others or find any solace in shared experiences. Nevertheless, in September 2018, numerous appeals for the Villarreal brothers finally yielded a positive result. The death sentences against the three Mexican brothers were commuted to prison terms, and they're now serving new sentences of 30 years in prison. While this is a positive development, the trio is still condemned to spend their time in prison here, with just each other to relate with. June 1999, Dole Chadee was executed for the disturbing murder of 4 people. However, 20 years after his execution, more details surfaced about his operation which left the whole world in shock. Nanki Sun Budram, also known as Dole Chadee, was a notorious criminal and cartel member, whose reign of terror began in Pipado, Trinidad and Tobago, where he operated a vast drug empire. Although he was never convicted of drug-related offenses, his reputation as a ruthless drug lord spread far and wide. On January 10, 1994, Chadee's downfall came when he and 8 members of his gang were convicted of the brutal murders of 4 innocent people: Dio, Rukmin, Hamilton, and Monica Babulal. The trial was a significant moment in the country's history, and all 9 defendants were sentenced to death. On June 4, 1999, Dole Chadee was set to be executed. In his final moments, he was comforted by his priest, Pundit Karamachandra Dinanath Dabai, who performed his last rites. And after his execution, authorities reclaimed Chadee's vast estate in Pipado, which he had illegally occupied for over 15 years. Property spanned 46.5 hectares and was converted into a drug rehab center as a fitting tribute to the victims of Chadee's crimes. However, before his execution, Chadee occupied himself with writing several letters. In fact, one of those letters is said to contain his confession, which was released in November 2017, almost 20 years after his death. The letter was posted to a Facebook group, TNT is Sweet, by a user named Teddy Rat, and this nickname belonged to a Shazard Khan, a close friend and henchman of Chadee. This letter lists people who allegedly helped Chadee and his gang in drug trafficking and avoiding conviction. Various news outlets have spoken to close relatives of the Budram family, who've confirmed the letter's authenticity. One relative who wished to remain anonymous said that while awaiting execution, Chadee wrote letters that were copied and given to his close relatives and friends outside of prison. According to this relative, Chadee's last wish was for the letters to be released 20 years after his death. The letter states in part,
I am condemned to die. I would like to confess my sins to the public so that the world would know what went wrong. I have asked certain lawyers to at least delay my execution until arrangements could be made for my last wish. That is a TV and radio interview of about 1 hour. My only hope now is the International Court in The Hague. I'm not afraid to die, but my secrets must be released.
The letter claimed that to expand his drug empire, Chadee worked with high-ranking police and legislative officials. It also alleges the favors he did for politicians in exchange for their cooperation. However, the names mentioned in this letter were never published for legal reasons. 1989. Richard Tipton went on a killing spree and got the police's attention. Now what happened next was nothing he could have imagined, as it cost him his life. From 1989 to July 1992, Richard Tipton operated a substantial drug trafficking conspiracy with his fellow principal partners, James Rohn and Corey Johnson. With solid affiliation to the cartel from Mexico, Tipton's operations began in Trenton, New Jersey, where Johnson and Rohn, both from New York City, became members. In August 1990, the conspiracy expanded its operations to Richmond, Virginia, and the surrounding areas. The operation was a significant and far-reaching criminal enterprise that lasted for several years and involved multiple locations. However, Tipton's operation in Trenton had to be shut down the next year when police confiscated a large quantity of crack cocaine and firearms. But this didn't bother him, as he still held on to other areas. In 1992, Tipton came under police radar yet again, when he and his partners were linked to the murders of 10 people in Richmond. Now, these murders were connected to the cartel and their drug business, and according to reports, the murders happened for different reasons. Some victims were suspected of betrayal or wrongdoing, while others were rivals in the drug trade, and even some had personally offended one of the group members. On January 4, 1992, Tipton and Rohn took Douglas Talley, a lower-level member who had messed up a drug deal, to the south side of Richmond. There, Rohn grabbed Talley from behind while Tipton repeatedly stabbed him. This attack lasted 3 to 5 minutes, and Talley suffered 84 stab wounds to the head, neck, and upper body, which ultimately killed him. The group continued in the same manner to eliminate everyone on their kill list. Some victims were viciously stabbed, and others were shot. By February 1993, all 3 partners were convicted in the Eastern District of Virginia. Tipton was found guilty of capital murder for 8 out of the 10 killings and was sentenced to death. James Rohn and Corey Johnson also received death sentences. So while on death row, Tipton is isolated in a small cell, cut off from the rest of the prison population. This solitary confinement is a difficult setting, with his cell also consisting of the basics: a bed, toilet, and a sink. However, they do allow him a few personal belongings as well. The cell itself is designed with security in mind, as it's site-proof with non-removable fixtures and no exposed piping. When it comes to Tipton's daily routine, it's all highly controlled, with every moment accounted for. He's allowed only some hours outside his cell each day, and relegated to a small secured yard for exercise. Even this brief freedom is closely monitored, with guards watching his every move. In addition to that, interaction with others, including guards and staff, is minimal and strictly supervised. Communication with the outside world is also heavily restricted. They're listening in on his phone calls. Visits are conducted through glass partitions, and physical contact is prohibited. Even his letters are scrutinized by staff before they reach his hands. Now, despite these harsh conditions, Tipton receives basic health care and enough food that just barely keeps him alive. One of the regular medical checkups Tipton undergoes is psychological evaluation to ensure he remains fit for his execution. All in all, they're watching him 24/7, making sure he doesn't escape or harm himself. His execution date was set for May 2006, but they postponed it because of a challenge to the lethal injection process, and to this day it has not been reset.